Recording. Thank you all for being here today. Today we have got, let's see, I'll give you a little welcome here. Welcome to the Meet the Editor event, one of our kind of final functions for the virtual Waterbird Society meeting this year. We've got just a handful of people that are logged in right now. I think there are a few more that will probably be joining us in the next several minutes. So at this point, we'll probably roll into where Andy and Jonathan are kind of introducing themselves. I'm going to give their good contact information in the chat window. While they're doing that, if you have questions, feel free to use that chat window. And eventually we'll kind of devolve probably into a more natural question and answer session as well. But maybe in the beginning, we'll keep ourselves muted and let our editors kind of take the reins of things. And if you need anything out of me, feel free just to ask. So I'm going to mute myself, and Andy, if you want to share your screen. I will put. I'm going to mute myself. Andy, are you muted? No. Okay.
No, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
And can you guys see the screen? Screen there, Kate?
Screen's great.
Okay, cool. Okay, so so thanks first of all to Kate Sheehan. She's moderating the session today, and also Kate, you're on the publications committee, correct? So so thanks for that. I'm Andy Kastner, editor for Waterbirds, and I'll tell you a little bit more about me. We've also got John Anderson on here today, several council members and other folks who've logged in. So it's great to have everyone here and just kind of get a chance for a conversation. The goal today really was, you know, I guess to share a little bit about who we are as the editors and other folks that are involved. Some of us could not be here today, some of us could, and so I'll talk about those folks and who they are and what they do, and give a little update on the journal, things like that. So I hope it's casual and fun, and start out telling you a little bit about just kind of who we are and what we do. So so I'm gonna kind of first talk just to briefly introduce myself and who I am, what I do. Like I said, I am the editor of Waterbirds. I've been doing this now for a little over a year. The day job is I'm a professor at a small liberal arts university in West Texas. But the fun part of that is it's an undergraduate institution, get to do a lot of traveling. I teach all of our field biology courses that are focused on animals and conservation. So I get to go all over the place, New Mexico, take honor students down to Big Bend National Park for a long birding session, work in the field down at the coast of Texas and around our playa lakes here. And then taking students out doing bird banding, hiking, etc. These three ladies may or may not be posing, but otherwise they're maybe looking at a raptor. This is actually my youngest child. This is Hannah, my daughter. She's about to release a sparrow at one of the grassland and shrubland bird banding sites that we operate here in West Texas. So teaching wise, that's kind of what I do. My job is primarily a teaching responsibility, and I also am the director of our Center for Undergraduate Research in Math and Science, which is mostly biology and biochemistry students, things like that. Research-wise, my interests are primarily focused on waterbirds. So I've done work on least sandpiper, interior least tern. I always tell my students the story that serendipity plays a part. This is a poster given by one of my recent students, Joseph Leos, at Southwestern Association of Naturalists meeting. And this is actually my undergraduate advisor, Edie Marsh Matthews, who's an ichthyologist. And if she hadn't moved whenever I was between my BS and MS degree, that's probably what I would have ended up doing, and you guys wouldn't know me. But I ended up studying the birds that I would see as I was out fishing and goofing around on the water around my home area. And so I've been working on those things for a while. Currently, I continue to work with least terns, shorebirds, wading birds, things like that. But I also have, since it's an undergraduate institution, give some liberty to my students into the things that they really want to work on. And as many of you, I think, probably have similar experiences. So I've got students working on other things like telemetry of woodpeckers. A couple of students, including our associate editor, have done a lot of work on Texas horned lizards, some on fish. So kind of a smorgasbord of stuff, which makes it fun and interesting. But my passion is really waterbirds, and that's why I was interested in getting involved with the journal and staying involved with the society. So enough about me. So my role as editor is to handle, all the major manuscripts and communicate with authors and so forth. Sarah Vanderleek is our associate editor. Sarah was a student at my institution at Wayland. She's now a grad student and TA at University of North Texas in the Department of Environmental Science. And Sarah primarily handles a lot of the copy edit work that we do, getting papers ready for final processing to print. Some author communication when she has time to do that. And she's done a little bit of reptile research, which is a part of what her thesis is on at UNT, working on turtles, but also quite a bit of stuff with birds. And so she's, from day one, been interested in being a part of this effort. And so glad to have her. She couldn't be here today, so I want to give her props and thanks for the work that she does for us. And hopefully one day at a meeting, you guys will get to meet this young lady. She's a pretty fabulous gal. So also you'll get to meet here in a moment John Anderson, College of the Atlantic. He's our book review editor. He'll talk about that here in a moment. And then I'll just kind of give you a list of our editorial board here later on. So we still good, Kate? You can hear me? I always want to stop and check. I'm Zoomophobic. So just a quick update on the journal. I don't know about many of you, but I think all of us probably feel somewhat like this guy right here in the picture. We're pushing really hard on the truck, but it doesn't seem to be having any effect. Whereas everyone else is getting the job done, I guess. Volume 43 for the 2020 volume, issue 1 is out. It's been out for a while. The other 3 issues are, two of them are behind schedule, but in copy edit for printing this month. So it may not be until January we see those in print, but they're in the process and we're getting caught up after a lot of delays from COVID. And I won't linger on that other than to say I hope that you guys have all fared well and stayed healthy, and that you and your loved ones are safe and doing okay. So I know we've all experienced those kinds of frustrations lately with our job and maybe with our health. So if you have questions about a current manuscript that's in the process, feel free to email me. Separate from this, for that, I try to keep people updated as much as possible, so don't hesitate to email if you have a question. Okay, so this is I wanted to go through a couple of details about kind of, what we're looking for, how to submit an article. I think just looking at the list of people who are here today, you probably already know. So I won't tarry, but the link for our IFC, the information for contributors, is on the Waterbirds Society webpage. I will be updating my email in that starting with the first of the year, so that email filters with my institution sometimes slow things down. And so I'm going to use a Gmail account in the future. So you'll see that if you want to submit a manuscript, that's the best email to use now. CC Sarah, just so that we both hopefully get an email, and we double check with each other every time to make sure we don't miss one. We consider articles on the ecology and biology and conservation of water birds. Kind of, a taxonomically specific focus, but with an international readership. And so I'll get into a little bit of those details and kind of what we're hoping for. But generally, those of you who are here, I think, have either published in or read the journal and know what we do. So one thing that we like to see submissions in the future, and I've talked to a few folks about putting together a review or synthesis papers. Those would be welcomed. We don't publish manuscripts that are monograph in length, so you got to be careful about the length of it, but we would really like to see more of those kinds of review and synthesis papers appear occasionally in the journal. So if you're thinking about that, let me know. Send me an email. We can talk about it. Some have and decided that it was going to be too long for this outlet. Others are working on a draft of something now. Another thing that, there's a lot of work being done on are things like predictive modeling that are, less field-based and maybe more, lab and computer-based sorts of things, but all the work that's being done with climate and climate resilience and things like that are of interest to our readers, I think, and we would welcome those kinds of papers too. In addition to the kinds of typical things you'd see in the journal. And so if you have a manuscript or you have questions about a potential one, send me an email and we can go from there. We also publish short communications or notes on the above subjects, but also on noteworthy natural history and behavioral observations that may be of interest to international readers. There's lots of interesting little things that we observe as we do our other field work and parts of bigger studies that sometimes never get published. And I'm a fan of those kinds of notes because they oftentimes contain information that you find nowhere else, and surprisingly get cited really often. It has to be, something that's obviously going to be of interest to our audience and international readership, but there's oftentimes it's easy to justify those kinds of things when you see them. So we do consider those as well. Couple of things that I would advise authors about as they consider manuscripts for the journal to submit to the journal. People ask a lot about, the geographic scope, and we are an international journal. We have an international readership, and the challenge is we're also really taxonomically specific, and that means that sometimes the paper is about a species that's a small endemic population in a little place, and that doesn't mean it won't be of interest to our international readers because it's so unique. It would be. But if you're working on a species that's, maybe it's a North American species and you're working on, say, colonies on the Texas coast or wherever, I'm just using Texas as my example because that's where I'm at, that you would put the population information and the ecological information that you have in your manuscript within the context of, that species population or that community of birds in the context of the hemisphere or the flyway or the continent, and include that sort of information. One of the things we get oftentimes will be manuscripts on a paper where, it may be population focused and survey focused, and it may be of value for conservation in poorly studied regions, but they haven't done a very effective job of putting those population numbers within a greater context that's known about that species or whatever. And so one of the ways that we can help those papers be successful is to keep that context in mind so that our international readers will value it and be interested in that. And so, and of course, our reviewers are the ones who help us make that call, and we try to find the right folks for that. So we publish papers that are on birds that live in aquatic systems and find their food and resources in aquatic systems. So, a paper on something like this kingfisher might be okay, but vermilion flycatcher, which occurs in most of our wetlands here in Texas, is not necessarily getting all of its resources from that wetland, and so may not be one that we would consider for the journal. So there's some distinctions for the kinds of things that we might look at. I want to turn it over to John Anderson. He's going to talk to you guys about book reviews. He's our Waterbirds book review editor. And so, John, I'm going to unshare my screen, and you can take over for a bit.
Thanks, Andy. Sorry, no pretty pictures from me, I'm afraid. Just my ugly mug, but there it is. So just a quick sort of update on this. Longtime members of the Society will remember that Waterbirds has periodically published reviews of relevant books. That kind of went into abeyance for a while, and then Andy called me up and said, "Hey, John, I'd really like to get the book reviews going again. Would you be willing to join the editorial board and head that up?" And I don't know whether he realized my problem, but I have a problem, and that is books. And many years ago, my wife said, "No more books, John." And I said, "Look, this could be so much worse. I could be addicted to heroin." And she said, "I think heroin would probably be a lot cheaper." It might be, but the books fill the house, the books fill the office, the books fill the other office. While everyone was getting ready for this meeting, I was actually having to move both my home office and one of my school offices. And the number of books that had to get carted from one place to another made even me realize that I really do have a bit of a problem with this. But I love books, and so it was a delight to be asked to head up the review process. There are lots and lots of interesting books relevant to some or all of us every year, and it's great when they get drawn to our attention, and reviews are a good place to do that. So what I'm really wanting to do this evening is to put out a plea to all of you, sort of a double whammy plea. The first is that if you're writing a book, have a friend or colleague who's writing a book, or know of somebody who is in the process of putting together a book that's relevant to the Society's general taxonomic focus, please let me know as soon as possible, because one of the things that publishers really like is advanced buzz on a book. And so once the book's out, they've already generally designed their marketing strategy. They've already got their blurbs on the back cover. But if you can get ahead of that curve, it makes their lives easier, and it's also exciting for us. So first request, please, like I say, if you're aware of anything that's in the pipeline right now, let me know, and we'll do our best to see what we can do about getting a review put together of it. Second part of the request is for all of you to consider participating in the review process. So when Andy contacted me and said, "Do you want to do the book reviews?" my initial thought was, "Oh God, I don't have time to write my own stuff, much less write about other people's stuff." And then he said, "Don't worry, John. What your goal is to find as many other people as possible who will do the reviews, and your job will be to coordinate those reviews, do some editing as necessary, and then forward it on to me and the associate editor for final publication review and get it in the journal." But that does mean I need to find folks who are willing to do that. And looking over past reviews, what we're looking for is something on the order of 1,000 words. Plus or minus, and enough information that will really give somebody the critical answer to the question, should I get this book? Should I use this in class? Should I recommend this to colleagues and specialists? And I realize in this day and age of Amazon, book reviewing has sort of mutated almost beyond recognition. And so I'm sure most of us have done our share of Amazon, 6-liners. And some of those actually have been quite interesting and useful, but they seldom if ever really get into the meat of the book. And then also because you quite often don't know who the reviewer is on Amazon, you've got no real context to judge the quality of the review, much less the quality of the book that's being reviewed. And what we're hoping for with reviews in the journal is to give really a no holds barred, no quarter given, you really need to read this book, or I hope never, but occasionally, nice try, perhaps you can move on. My goal would be that we would aim for books that we would really encourage people to definitely think about including either in their own personal research libraries or in their university and college libraries. Those of you who are in sort of the academic whirly gig will know that library budgets are getting slashed and slashed every single year. And so convincing the librarian to order books, especially hard copies, can be quite a struggle. And this is where you can do a real service to your students, friends, and colleagues with a really good review that encourages that librarian that, yes, this is the book that they need to make sure they include in that next round of purchases. It's also a really wonderful thing that authors can use for feedback on future work. So having a really thorough review of your book, going beyond the initial reviews that you go through in the editorial process, can give you some really interesting and useful ideas about what the next book or the book after might be. So consider it really an interesting service, but also potentially a really fun service. One thing I have to caution you all about is that when I've done book reviews in the past, almost always the publisher would send me a hard copy of the book, which only added to my problem about shelf space. I've started getting into contact with major publishers in our area, and the first question they send me is, are you okay with digital? And there's part of me that wants to say yes, absolutely. And then there's part of me also that, you know, reviewers' only reward quite often is a copy of their own of that book. And so I'm trying to encourage the publishers I'm speaking to, send us an actual hard copy. You'll get a better review as a result. The other thing about it is that I don't know about you all, but I've got incredible screen fatigue from the past year, but I somehow or other don't have the same fatigue about books. And so having a hard copy by the bed or at the end of the desk or whatever is a much better guarantee that I'm actually going to pick it up 3 or 4 or 5 times and really give it a good work over. So my goal is to get hard copies to share with reviewers of the books that we're going to be looking at. Can't promise it in every single case. There are going to be some books that I will think that we really should mention in the journal that I can't get you a hard copy of. But we'll do our best to make sure that the least you get out of this is something to fill up your own bookshelves. And I'm really happy to answer any questions people have. We're just really starting this off. Before the meeting kicked off last month, I was writing around the different publishers and got some nibbles from some of them and haven't heard back from others. Again, if you're aware of particular publishers that I might not necessarily know about, we are an international society, please let me know, and I'm happy to drop them a note and say, we're looking for good books to review. That's really all I've got to say right now. So any questions, delighted to have them. And I'm particularly delighted if you want to volunteer a text or volunteer your services. And please, if you do want to be a reviewer, if you could let me know what particular areas you would like to focus on. There's no point in sending you a super model-based book if what you're really interested in is natural history or vice versa. And if there's a particular taxonomic subgroup in Waterbirds, it's important that we get the best reviews we possibly can. And if you're the expert on a particular species, make sure I know that so I can make sure you get the relevant book. Andy, anything I'm leaving out?
No, that sounds great. I would just add to it that when I was asking around about who maybe we should whose arm we should twist to be the book reviewer, several people said that John Anderson is a real bibliophile. So I guess that was true. We appreciate your service.
Pat's got some good advice for you if you need it too eventually, John. So
I
link up with her.
Hey, John, do you want to limit it to books, or let's say there's a new birding app, or like, are those things included in the realm of book review or products, like, or do you want it strictly to be books?
You know, Dave, that's a great question. And I'd probably kick it back to Andy to a degree, but there are increasing numbers of really valuable, as you say, apps and field tools that it might be useful to consider. I don't think we should go down the road too far in actual technology. There are other outlets for that, but there are certainly some applications that people have shown me that made my life easier and might make other people's lives easier. So, Andy, you got any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I like the idea because, you know, for one, we have, well, when I teach ornithology or whatever at my institution, the students don't carry a book anymore. It's their phone, and hopefully they're not texting, they're looking at the field guide. You know, so I think, you know, the fact that, you know, applications on the phone are now a surrogate for a paperback field guide that we would use, that would certainly be a great thing. And then there's, you know, it made me start thinking immediately, Dave, of a lot of other things that are out there, you know, with acoustic recording and acoustic analysis and all sorts of applications, GIS applications, et cetera, that are now basically on the phone, in your hand, in the field, anywhere, as long as you have, you know, some ability to use that. And so I can't imagine why those things wouldn't be valuable to consider for reviews too, if you're willing to do so, John. And again, you know, that's where, you know, you get the technical experts to look at this and do the review. And I think that would be a great resource for people, actually, because every time I go to a meeting, I hear about some application from someone and I'm thinking, well, what is that? I got to figure out how to use it. Or is it any good? Is it worth it?
Some of those could have really good citation rates too.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's true. Especially if they're real, you know, tools of the trade sort of things that are now all technology.
I think let's keep that open and see what comes down the pike. But Dave, I think it's a great idea. And keep in mind, this is a real Luddite speaking. I think my oldest book is 600 years old, and it's just as readable as it was all those years ago.
Yeah.
Whereas I confess, when I was cleaning out my office, I found a huge stack of 5¼ inch floppies. And if anyone's got a computer drive that'll still read those, I'd love to know what's on them.
You have to read that old book in Latin?
It's actually in Greek.
Oh, great. Nice. So I learned today, or maybe it was yesterday, I can't remember now, that one of our own, Mike Irwin, has a book in the process about his, I think it's a popular book, but it's about his life as an ornithologist working on beaches. So that might be something you want to think about getting it. I think it's coming out in the next year or something. So it might be something you want to put on your list.
Yeah.
That's the sort of thing I think it'd be really fun to know about. And on the one hand, I think it's really important that we do review technical books, but at the same time, I point out to my students that we're still reading Sand County Almanac long after most of
Yeah.
Aldo Leopold's technical papers have disappeared into the quiet of the stacks. So a really good popular book that captures the sorts of things that people are up to could be a really powerful way of bringing on the next generation into what we're doing. Jeff suggesting floppies make good frisbees. Yes, Jeff, they do. I'd still like to know what was on some of these. One question actually I had for you, Andy, and again, I'll put it out for the group to consider. Ideally, I would love us to be sort of starting from here and moving forward with things as they're coming out. But there have been some interesting publications in the last year, COVID be damned. And I'm just wondering how you or the group feels about slight retrospective, a book that might have escaped people's notice, but might be really useful if you know about it.
I'll chime in and would invite others to do the same, but I feel like, the book review, and if we add, other tools of review in the future to this, serves a couple of purposes. One is, the publishers have their own motives to promote the book and be able to say great things on the back cover about, so-and-so Waterbirds review of this book was blah, blah, blah. But then the bigger thing is, for all of us who are doing this work day to day, those are our tools and the things that we utilize. And we often wonder, is this really worth the expense or not? And so that's the service it provides to our members and our readers, will be to give information so they can make a good decision about whether this is something I want to utilize or not. And so I think from that standpoint, even if it's already on the shelf, absolutely we could provide a review if it's a recent book, and especially if you notice that maybe it's been absent, reviews of that text have been absent in journals elsewhere. There hasn't been a lot of reviews of it or whatever. That'd be a great thing to consider, I think.
So that opens it up to all of you to think about, okay, what's been on your lockdown reading shelves that really you thought, gosh, I wish I could thrust that into somebody's arms. It can be a lot of fun, honest. And 1,000 words, you wouldn't believe how quickly you can spend them before you know you're done. So, and again, what we're looking for is fun reading in the review itself. I'm sure, again, you've encountered some reviews that maybe the book itself wasn't so good, but the review still made you excited about the subject, or I need to check this one out in spite of all. And then there are other reviews that the book turned out to be absolutely brilliant, but the reviewer was having a bad day and pretty much killed it. And an anecdote, if I may. Speaking of Aldo Leopold, of whom I'm a huge fan, some of you will know that the most popular edition of Sand County Almanac these days in paperback is Sand County Almanac with essays from Round River. And I didn't know what Round River was, except it was one of the essays that's in the book. And then I was in a used bookshop, as is my wont, and I stumbled across a book called Round River by Aldo Leopold. And it was a collection of his essays that came out after his death. And I happened to run into Estella, the last surviving Leopold child, at a retreat several years ago, and we got to talking. And I said, so what's the story with Round River? There's some really nice stuff in there. And she laughed and she said, "Oh, John, don't you know Rachel killed it?" And I said, "Rachel who?" And she said, "Rachel Carson, of course." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "Well, after Dad died, we really wanted to get some of his other lesser known essays out. So the boys and I put this together as a collection, and the publisher was excited to publish it. And then Rachel Carson wrote an absolutely scathing review where she said, "Oh, this Aldo Leopold, all he ever wants to do is shoot things. He never goes anywhere without a gun." And this was right at the beginning of the, dare I say it, hippie movement. And it completely killed sales. And that was the end of Round River. So be careful when you're doing reviews, because you may have really unforeseen consequences. People take this sort of thing really seriously. And you can really boost something and get it into people's hands that really ought to have it, or you could potentially keep it out of somebody's hands. And so that's where we're really going to be looking for constructive criticism and, you know, as much as possible, realistic positivism around somebody's work. That's all I got, Andy.
Great. Thank you, John. Kate, do you have anything before I continue, or?
No, go right ahead. I think we were just, you had one more thing and then we were going to kind of open it up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I would add, you know, because that kind of, well, maybe if I can get the share screen to work again, that segues right into what was next with manuscript review. So, you know, I would add to what John said that, you know, whether it's a book review or a manuscript review, I always try, unless right off the bat we recognize that the manuscript is simply not one that's appropriate for the journal and that the reviewers would not want to consider really. Other than that, we try to give authors as much constructive feedback as we can, whether that manuscript is accepted or not. And I think the same is true with John's intentions for book reviews, that we want to give an honest review and a thorough review, but we also want it to be constructive. So what are the pros? What are the cons? Where are the benefits to the reader? Maybe where are those things lacking? So that, you know, everyone gets the information that they need, good and bad. And so, which that's the next thing I wanted to talk briefly about is, are you interested in reviewing manuscripts for Waterbirds? And of course, books or maybe these new technologies that we brought up. John, you might remind me when we do the new information for contributors, which comes out here in a couple months, to perhaps add a little language about those possibilities. So, so we welcome people to volunteer to be reviewers. It's a lot easier to have that than to twist arms. This year has been especially challenging for people trying to find time to get things done, and so it seems like the list of reviewers that we solicit and subsequently they can't do it is longer this year just because of people's time. And so if you're interested in reviewing the manuscripts for Waterbirds, let me know. I won't ask you all the time, but if I know what you would be interested in reviewing and what your expertise is and your interest, then I would certainly keep a list of those things, and helps me to find quickly who to look for. And so feel free to send an email and let me know if you're interested in those things and what you'd like to look at. In particular, a lot of times, I think sometimes our graduate students feel like maybe they shouldn't do a review yet, but oftentimes they're effective and critical and good evaluators of things. And so I would invite you to you know, please let me know if you're interested. So we need all sorts of expertise as we do this. And then the other thing is we ask our reviewers to try to return things within a 3 to 4 week time frame. That is sometimes difficult for people to pull off, and I understand that. And but hopefully we can make that work. So let's see. I had thought of 2 or 3 things while John was speaking that I meant to mention, and now I've forgotten most of them again. One would be that we do publish the journal in print, but also online on Bio1. One of the questions I get a lot from people is, are these articles open access? Or can they be open access? We don't charge extra for open access papers, but basically the editorial board selects, editors and editorial boards select usually a couple of the main articles and a couple of notes each issue to feature as open access on Bio1. And so we certainly will consider requests for open access, and we've had a little bit of conversation about, you know, how does that affect the revenue the journal generates through Bio1 for articles being accessed there. And so those are things we're talking about, but I wanted to try to address that question a little bit. And also something that we've started new this year is, since we have the journal published online and in print, we are now publishing any supplemental material, additional maps for tracking studies, model details that authors feel are necessary but are really lengthy in the manuscript. Those kinds of supplementary things can be published as an appendix, but only in the online version of the article or the journal, which saves space, it saves page costs, but it also still allows the authors to get that information out there to readers in a way that's manageable. And so don't hesitate if you have that kind of information. We do ask that you would refrain from putting it in just because, only include those kinds of details if you think they're really necessary. But that's definitely a possibility now that we can include appendix and things like that in the supplementary information online and not have to print those. Those are the things that I think that I wanted to bring up that I had forgotten earlier. I want to just say thanks to our editorial board, names that many of you may recognize that have been involved with seabird and waterbird research for many years, and other folks that are relatively new to the board. And all of these people help the editorial team make decisions. They help identify people who would be good reviewers, sometimes available at a moment's notice to consider a manuscript when all other requests don't work. So these folks are a big help to the editors continuously in many ways, and I just want to say thanks to those folks for their efforts. And that's my last slide, so I'm gonna close this PowerPoint and stop sharing, and we'd love to have a discussion or any questions that you have. And Kate, if you want, I can see one in the chat already.
Yeah, so Jeff asked a question if you wanna go for that one.
Sure. So Jeff Spindelow asks, how do I handle things when I get 2 opposing reviews? Typically, if those reviews are you know, one's an accept, one's a absolutely reject, I'll typically find a third reviewer to try to break that tie. I'll also consider oftentimes the review that would be really honestly scrutinized a little more closely by me or others would be the rejection. And I would look and see how did that reviewer also offer constructive comments? Did they offer, you know, positive comments about the paper and suggestions that would improve it or not? Or was it, you know, a fairly negative view of the paper? And especially if it were a negative view, I'd certainly find at least one other reviewer to consider that and try to break the tie. So I hope that answers your question. Feel free to unmute if it doesn't. Go ahead, Kate. I'll. Looks like they're coming in one at a time. You want me to just pick them and go, or do you
Yeah,
wanna...
that's fine. I think if we're overwhelmed, I can start juggling them with you.
Yeah. So, is it Matus Ledouan asks, is it possible to attach supplementary material and data in a Waterbird article? yes, if it's lengthy, like I said before, we'll publish those things in the online version of the journal. And most of the time, we don't have very many papers that have those sort of supplements attached. And so those are sometimes the ones that I can make an open access so that people can get to that material easily, to provide it to our readers. So Matus, if that answers your question, then great. And if not, please feel free to chat additional things. Any other questions? Oh, Dave asks about special issues and challenges for the editors. Yes, Dave, we do special issues. We do have actually 2 in the works. And they definitely help attract attention from maybe folks who don't normally read the journal routinely based on specialized areas. So one that you can expect that I think is on track to be out with either issue 1 of 2021 or issue 2 next spring or summer is a special issue on the black rail. And a series of papers that have been a lot of work being done on that species with its recent listing, and so I know that that special issue is in the works, and it should have I think 5 articles. We also have a special issue planned for the next Herons of the World Symposium. That was actually planned to occur this year, but COVID nixed that. They postponed that meeting for now. So we still plan to do that special issue when the time comes. The guest editors for the Black Rail issue are Whitney Beasler and oh goodness, if I wouldn't have tried to mention their names, I would remember them. Brian Watts, sorry. And then for the Herons of the World Symposium, that special issue is going to be edited by Chip Weslow and Clay Green, John Berzerod, and some others, I think. So, and the way that process works is we ask folks who want to propose a special issue or a special section within a current issue of the journal to write a proposal, include how many articles they think they would have, how they plan to pay for the costs. So the society does not supplement the cost of those special issues or special sections. It's up to the editors, the guest editors of that, to meet those obligations. And so they have to demonstrate how those page costs will be met. And then we, consider whether or not it would be of interest to our readers, and it doesn't have to be voted on by the council, but we certainly typically run it by council members and the publication committee folks to make sure that it seems like a good idea to them, and go from there. And it definitely generates additional readers to the journal, and so we would love to continue to consider those. The challenge to me is relatively minimal. If we have good guest editors, they do the work, and we always retain the right of the editor-in-chief to make the final decision on the publishability of a paper. But the way we typically manage problems with that is I see the manuscripts first, give feedback to the guest editors about where I may see some concerns, or if we have another couple of folks involved, and then they send it out for peer review separately after that. And so they get feedback, kind of an initial, fatal flaw kind of analysis from me and maybe some other folks before it goes through the review process. Those are the biggest challenges that we'd sometimes encounter is, reviews were not very rigorous and didn't catch things that were a real problem. And we've tried to create some systems that will minimize that in the future. So Let's see. Kaz Taylor asks, is there room for other kinds of articles, forums that are of more general interest, articles about racial or gender equality in Waterbirds research, or about effects of COVID on Waterbird research? You know, Kaz, I think those are all reasonable ideas. I don't know. I know that we haven't published that sort of content in the past, but I also like the idea of having, you know, kind of peer edited editorial type things now and then. I think those are valuable to our readers. And so I think, you know, it would be a question to bring to the council and the publications committee before I, you know, could say, yeah, for sure, because we've got to consider the cost and limitations of space in the journal. But I think generally we could plan for those kinds of things and go from there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I feel like it would bring in more readership, you know, potentially anyway. I guess. Dave says that it has been studied in the past. It has been published in the past. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were editorials, so I just thought, yeah.
Yeah, I like those kinds of communication, and I think they generate conversations and address, you know, concerns and issues that we all face, and things that we've talked about a lot, and are at the forefront of our discussions, and you know, major needs that we need to address. And so, you know, I would probably seek out some folks that are interested in this to help, you know, handle some of the review and decision making and editing of those kinds of things. So just to help with that load, but it's definitely an interesting possibility. I see one of our publication committee members shaking her head yes. So there's one. Other thoughts, other questions about other things?
One thing I'm going to chip in, and Andy's already alluded to this, but you know, as the former guest editor of a special edition, I have to say the hardest thing in the job was getting reviewers and getting the reviews back. And nobody likes to do reviews. It's just one of those things that always seems to get put at the bottom of the pile. But then you actually get around to doing it, and it takes 1/10 the amount of time that it took to avoid doing it in the first place. And so if I can just make a plea for all of us, you know, if Andy does tap you on the shoulder, pretty please respond, and respond as quickly as possible, because it moves the process along so well, or it slows it down so much.
Yeah, thanks for that, John. You know, it's funny. One of the things I've learned in doing this is you either get your reviews back really fast or not. And it's like someone has time or just decides I'm just going to go ahead and do it and get it done, and it's finished, or it takes a while, and it's easy to forget. I'm always surprised at, you know, folks that I know well, that I know do quite a few reviews, and they still need a reminder because they just don't think about it. It's not on the forefront of their mind and their tasks at hand. And so, yeah, I would definitely, you know, reiterate that prompt reviews help us a lot, and oftentimes don't take as long as you think. So,
Andy, you might have covered this before, but have you considered using graduate students for reviews? I think it's a real good learning process for them.
Absolutely. In fact, you know, I mentioned this in the solicitation for reviewers a while ago. If we do have folks who are grad students, or you know of people who you know, are grad students, you have students who you think would be a good one. I've had several colleagues that I've emailed for a review, and they said, I can't do it, but if you're okay with it, I'll send it to my doctoral student, and you know, we'll go from there. And those are oftentimes great reviews. Truth is, sometimes they're pretty harsh. You know, sometimes graduate students are worse critics than those of us who've been doing it for a longer time. And so, you know, it's their turn to give somebody a hard time. And, you know, but I say that, in jest, the truth is they're oftentimes great reviewers and really keen on getting it done and for the opportunity. And so absolutely, please, I would invite everybody to never hesitate to, if you don't have time, suggest one of your grad students, and I'm okay contacting them directly or copying you or however we do that. But it works quite well a lot of times and get good reviews. I've
We
got
a follow-up from Dave here also.
Yeah, I see that. So room for more consistent or routine reporting for grant recipients, student award winners, special recognition awards. So yes, Dave, we generally have a calendar schedule where there's a specific issue each year where we publish information like student award winners for the Nisbet Award and the Cushland Award and the Waterbird Society Research Grants. And also Jonathan Cohen asked recently if I would announce the winner for the conservation paper that's in fact she or he, I can't remember the author's name, will be speaking about that work on the 5th during our awards ceremony and business meeting. So absolutely we do those kinds of things. Jeff, did you?
Her first name is Flavia, I think.
Flavia, yes. I could not remember for sure her name. So,
yeah.
So we do try to put those out once a year, and I know it probably seems a little bit off timing this year because we're behind with those issues. So, normally I think you would have noticed it. So.
Any other questions? Things worth discussing at this point?
I would just say, in my experience as an editor for a different journal, it's really useful when people send back, you ask somebody to review and they send back names of other people. And so you were talking about graduate student reviewers. If you just encourage that in the letter that goes out, to really strongly encourage it. I mean, I know it always says it to some extent, but really strongly encourage, please, if you can't do it, please send some names of other people who can, including potentially your graduate students or graduate students, and just really emphasize that, because I never realized as just a reviewer how useful that was as an editor to get those additional names when somebody really can't do the review or it's not available.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion to even encourage them to consider, current or recent grad students for potential reviewers. And I always do try to ask for suggestions if they can't do it, but I don't think to be that specific. That's a good point, Cass. Dave asked a question, and I don't want to rob the clock here, Kate, so keep me on track. But this probably, I guess, looking at the clock needs to be our last question. But we're doing good with regard to submission rates. This year, we actually have, I think, at this point in time, relative to last year, a few more manuscripts than we did at this time last year. We're still a little lower than kind of the 10-year average for the journal. But we're talking about, a difference of maybe 20 or so manuscripts compared to that 10-year average, or maybe a little more. Can't remember exactly. So lower than we've been in years past, but compared to the last couple of years, we're on track or maybe even a little bit better. And a lot of times it seems like I get a kind of a flush of manuscript submissions right now. People kind of get done with their field season and maybe their semester of teaching or whatever, and we oftentimes get a few more manuscripts kind of late in the year to wrap things up. So I think we're on pace to be about where we were last year at least. So the effects of the pandemic have been more about just time constraints for the editors and reviewers and trying to stay on top of things while I've got an old dog like me who teaches face-to-face, and now all of a sudden I've got to not only do that, but also give it all online. And it's just, what the heck? How many hours does that take So fun times.